Marcus Thompson never expected that dropping his daughter off at Jefferson Middle School would lead to the most controversial day of his career as a federal investigator. What started as a routine Tuesday morning would spiral into a situation so intense that parents, teachers, and even school board members would find themselves pleading for his understanding. The new girl everyone had been whispering about was about to become the center of something much bigger than anyone imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air carried the usual chaos of Jefferson Middle School's drop-off zone. Cars lined up bumper to bumper along Maple Street, parents rushing to get their kids out before the first bell. Marcus Thompson sat in his black Ford Explorer, watching his 13-year-old daughter Emma gather her backpack from the passenger seat. "Remember what we talked about," Marcus said, adjusting his rearview mirror to get a better look at the school entrance. "If anyone gives you trouble about the science fair project, Dad, I've got it handled," Emma interrupted, rolling her eyes in that way only middle schoolers could master. "Mrs. Rodriguez already approved my volcano design? Stop worrying." Marcus smiled despite himself. Emma had inherited her mother's determination and his analytical mind, a combination that both impressed and concerned him. Since Sarah's death 3 years ago, he'd become hyper-vigilant about every aspect of Emma's life, maybe too much so. "All right, kiddo. Have a good day." Emma leaned over and kissed his cheek before sliding out of the SUV. Marcus watched her join, the stream of students flowing toward the main entrance, her red backpack bouncing with each step. He was about to pull away when something caught his attention. Near the bike racks, a small crowd had formed. Not the usual cluster of friends chatting before class, but something different. The body language was all wrong, a tight circle with someone in the center, the kind of formation Marcus had seen too many times in his line of work. He shifted the Explorer into park and squinted through the windshield. A girl with dark hair stood in the middle of the group, her shoulders hunched forward, clutching a violin case against her chest like a shield. She was small, probably a 6th grader, and clearly knew based on how she kept looking around as if searching for an escape route. The kids surrounding her weren't being subtle about their intentions. Marcus recognized the signs immediately. The exaggerated laughter, the way they kept moving closer, the phone cameras being held at chest level to avoid detection by the teachers monitoring the entrance. "Come on, Isabella, play us something," one of the boys was saying, loud enough for Marcus to hear through his partially open window. The kid was tall for his age, probably 8th grade, with the kind of confident swagger that usually came from being untouchable at home. "My mom says you're supposed to be some kind of musical genius or something." The girl, Isabella, shook her head quickly. "I don't want to play right now. The bell's about to ring." "Oh, she doesn't want to," a blonde girl chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "That's too bad, because we really want to hear what makes you so special." She emphasized the word special like it was something distasteful. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd dealt with bullies before, both as a kid growing up in Detroit and later as a federal investigator, working cases involving intimidation and harassment. The pattern was always the same: find someone vulnerable, isolate them, then push until they broke. Isabella clutched her violin case tighter. "Please, I just want to go to class." "Nobody's stopping you," the tall boy said, spreading his arms wide in a gesture of mock innocence. "We just want to see what all the fuss is about. I mean, you did get moved up 2 grades in music, right? That's what everyone's saying." The circle tightened. More phones appeared. Isabella's face had gone pale, and Marcus could see her hands trembling even from his position across the parking lot. He checked his watch. 7:45. The teachers at the entrance were focused on directing traffic flow, not monitoring. What was happening 30 yards away, behind a row of parked cars? The first bell wouldn't ring for another 10 minutes, which meant this could go on for a while. Marcus had two options: drive away and hope someone else intervened, or get involved in something that wasn't technically his business. Under normal circumstances, he might have chosen the first option, but these weren't normal circumstances, and something about the way Isabella held herself reminded him of Emma during her first weeks at Jefferson after they'd moved to Riverside following Sarah's funeral. He turned off the engine. "Look, if you don't want to play for us, maybe you could teach us something else," the blonde girl was saying as Marcus approached. Her name was Chloe Brennan, he realized. He'd seen her at a few school events with her mother, who served on the PTA board. Like, how do you get teachers to feel so sorry for you that they put you in classes with high schoolers? "I'm not in classes with high schoolers," Isabella said quietly. "It's just the advanced music theory class at the community college. It's only twice a week." "Oh, just advanced music theory," another boy mocked. "At the community college, when you're 12. "I'm 13, Isabella corrected, then immediately looked like she regretted speaking up. Marcus positioned himself behind a blue minivan where he could observe without being obvious. He pulled out his phone and opened the camera app, more out of habit than any immediate plan. In his line of work, documentation was everything. 13 and already taking college classes, Chloe continued. That must make you feel pretty superior to the rest of us regular kids. "It doesn't," Isabella said, her voice barely audible now. "I never said I was better than anyone." "You didn't have to say it," the tall boy jumped in. His name was Tyler. Marsh, Marcus remembered. His father owned 3 car dealerships in the county and had a reputation for throwing money around to solve problems. When you show up and immediately get special treatment, the message is pretty clear. Isabella took a step backward, but there was nowhere to go. The bike rack was directly behind her, and the semicircle of kids had effectively cut off her other escape routes. "I didn't ask for special treatment," she said, her voice starting to waver. "The music teacher just said I should join the advanced class because I was ahead of the regular curriculum." "Right, because you're so gifted," Chloe said, drawing out. The word "like" it was an insult. "I bet you think you're going to get into some fancy conservatory and become famous while the rest of us are stuck here being normal." Marcus found himself gripping his phone tighter. He recognized the technique: isolate the target, attack their strengths, make them feel guilty for having talents or opportunities. It was psychological warfare, and these kids were surprisingly good at it. Isabella's eyes were starting to glisten with unshed tears, but she kept her chin up. "I just want to learn music, that's all." "Well, maybe you should learn it somewhere else," Tyler said, stepping closer. "Jefferson Middle School might not be advanced enough for someone like you." The circle contracted again. Marcus counted 7 kids now, with more drifting over from the parking lot as word spread that something interesting was happening. The mob mentality was kicking in. Kids who might never bully someone individually were getting swept up in the group dynamic. "Play something," one of the newer arrivals demanded. "If you're so good, prove it." "I already said I don't want to," Isabella replied, but her voice was losing strength. "Come on," Chloe pressed. "What's the big deal? You play in front of college students, right? We're just middle schoolers. Should be easy." Marcus could see the trap being laid. If Isabella played, they'd find ways to mock her performance. If she didn't, they'd use that as proof she was a fraud. It was a no-win situation, designed to humiliate regardless of her choice. Isabella looked around desperately, finally spotting the teachers near the main entrance. They were still focused on directing the flow of arriving students, completely unaware of what was happening in their blind spot. "Mrs. Patterson," Isabella called out, raising her voice for the first time. "Mrs. Patterson." But the music teacher was too far away, and the background noise of arriving cars and chattering students swallowed her words. "She can't hear you," Tyler said with satisfaction. Besides, what are you going to tell her? That we asked you to play. Violin. Yeah, Chloe added. We're just being friendly. Wanting to hear your music is a compliment, right? The gaslighting was sophisticated for middle schoolers. Marcus wondered where they'd learned these techniques, then remembered that kids today grew up with social media, where psychological manipulation was often disguised as content. Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her free hand, still clutching. The violin case with the other. Please just leave me alone. We will, Tyler said. Right after you play something, one song, that's all. Then you can go to your fancy classes and forget all about us regular kids. The crowd had grown to nearly a dozen students now. Phones were recorded from multiple angles. Marcus realized that whatever happened next would likely end up on social media within hours, probably with edited context that would make Isabella look bad, regardless of how she handled the situation. He made his decision. Marcus stepped out from behind the minivan and walked directly toward the group. His federal investigator training kicked in automatically. Confident stride, neutral expression, hands visible but ready. He didn't announce himself or demand attention. He simply entered their space with the kind of presence that made people take notice. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The effect was immediate. The chatter died down as the kids registered that an adult was approaching, and not just any adult. Marcus was 6'2", broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to authority. His dark suit and serious expression suggested he wasn't just another parent. Running late for drop-off. Morning, Marcus said casually, stopping just outside the circle. His voice was calm, friendly even, but it carried an undertone that made several of the kids step back reflexively. Tyler recovered first, flashing the kind of smile that probably worked on teachers and parents who didn't know better. Good morning. Sir, we were just talking to Isabella here about music. Is that right? Marcus's eyes swept the group, taking in their positions, their expressions, the phones that were quickly being lowered or hidden. Sounds like quite a conversation. Isabella looked up at him with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. She was even younger than he'd initially thought, with the kind of vulnerable intelligence that reminded him painfully of Emma at that age. Actually, Chloe said, her voice taking on the syrupy tone that middle school manipulators used with adults. We were hoping Isabella would play something for us. She's so talented, and we just wanted to hear her violin. How considerate of you, Marcus replied, his tone perfectly neutral. He looked directly at Isabella. Do you want to play for them? Isabella's eyes widened slightly. It was probably the first time all morning that someone had asked her what she actually wanted, instead of telling her what she should do. No, she said quietly, then cleared her throat and repeated it more firmly. No, I don't want to play right now. Well, there you have it, Marcus said, turning back to the group. She doesn't want to play right now. Tyler's smile faltered slightly. We weren't forcing her or anything. We were just asking. Of course, Marcus agreed, and she answered, so I guess that's settled. The silence stretched for several seconds. Marcus could see the kids trying to figure out who he was and what authority he might have. Some were probably wondering if he was Isabella's father. Others might be considering whether he was a teacher or administrator they didn't recognize. The bell's gonna ring soon, Marcus observed, checking his watch. Probably want to head toward the building. It wasn't a command, technically, but something in his delivery made it clear that it wasn't really a suggestion either. Several of the newer arrivals took the hint and started drifting away, suddenly remembering they had things to do before the first period. Chloe wasn't ready to give up yet. Are you Isabella's dad? She asked, with the kind of innocent curiosity. That wasn't innocent at all. I'm a parent, Marcus replied, which was true without being specific. I drop my daughter off here every morning. Oh, cool, Tyler said, his voice regaining some confidence. "What grade is she in? Maybe we know her." Marcus smiled slightly. The kid was fishing for information, trying to figure out if this was someone he needed to worry about, or just a random parent who would forget about this interaction as soon as he drove away. "Emma Thompson," Marcus said. "7th grade." He watched recognition flicker across a few faces. Emma was well-liked, academically successful, and had friends across multiple social groups. Messing with her father wouldn't be politically smart. "Oh, Emma's cool," one of the boys said quickly. "She's in my science class. She helped me with algebra last week," another added. Marcus nodded. "She's a good kid. Raised her to look out for people who might need a friend." The message was subtle, but clear. Emma would hear about this, and by extension, so would her social circle. The cost-benefit analysis was shifting in Isabella's favor. "We should probably get going," Chloe said, glancing at her phone. "First period starts soon." "Good thinking," Marcus agreed. The group began to disperse, but not before Tyler made one last attempt to save face. "Hey, Isabella," he called out as he walked backward toward the school entrance. "Maybe we can hear you play some other time, when you're ready." Isabella nodded politely, but didn't respond verbally. She waited until the kids were out of earshot before turning to Marcus. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "No problem," Marcus replied. "Everyone deserves to start their day without harassment." Isabella adjusted her grip on the violin case. "Are you really Emma Thompson's dad?" "I am. She seems nice. She smiled at me yesterday in the hallway." "That sounds like Emma." Marcus paused. "You settling in okay at Jefferson? Besides this morning, I mean." Isabella shrugged. "It's different from my old school. Everything's bigger here, and I don't really know anyone yet." Marcus nodded. He remembered Emma's struggles with the transition after Sarah's death, how hard it had been for her to find her place in a new environment while dealing with grief and change. "Takes time," he said. "But you'll find your people. Just focus on being yourself and doing what you love." The first bell rang, echoing across the campus. Students who had been lingering in the parking lot and courtyard began moving with more purpose toward the building entrances. "I should go," Isabella said. "I don't want to be late for homeroom." "Good plan." Marcus watched her start toward the school, then called after her. "Isabella." She turned back. "If anything like this happens again, don't hesitate to find a teacher or call for help. And if you can't find anyone else, Emma knows where to find me." Isabella smiled for the first time that morning. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson." Marcus waited until she disappeared into the building before walking back to his Explorer. As he drove away from Jefferson Middle School, he thought about the interaction he'd just witnessed and interrupted. The bullying had been sophisticated, psychological rather than physical, designed to avoid obvious detection while maximizing emotional damage. But something told him this wasn't over. Kids like Tyler and Chloe didn't usually back down after one intervention, especially when they felt like they'd been embarrassed in front of their peers. They'd be more careful next time, more subtle, but they wouldn't necessarily stop. Marcus pulled into the parking lot of a coffee shop 2 blocks from the school and sat in his car for a moment thinking. His phone buzzed with a text from his partner at the federal office, reminding him about a case briefing at 9 a.m. He had 45 minutes to get across town, grab coffee, and review the files for a fraud investigation that had been consuming most of his attention for the past month. But as he drove toward downtown Riverside, Marcus couldn't shake the image of Isabella standing in that circle, holding her violin case like armor against a threat she was too young to fully understand. He'd seen that same look on too many faces in his professional life, the expression of someone who knew they were in danger but didn't have the tools to fight back effectively. The difference was that most of his cases involved adults who had at least some agency in their situations. Isabella was 13 years old, new to the school, academically gifted in a way that made her a target, and apparently without the social connections that might have protected her. Marcus made a mental note to ask Emma about Isabella when he picked her up that afternoon. Not in a way that would make Emma feel like she was being recruited as a spy, but just to get a sense of how the girl was doing and whether the morning's intervention had been sufficient or just a temporary pause in something larger. His phone rang as he pulled into the federal building's parking garage. The caller ID showed his supervisor's number. "Thompson," he answered. "Marcus, where are we on the Henderson case?" Agent Sarah Chen's voice came through the car speakers. "The prosecutor wants to know if we'll have everything ready for grand. Jury next week." Marcus switched mental gears, pushing thoughts of middle school drama to the back of his mind. "We'll be ready. I've got 3 more interviews scheduled this week, and the financial analysis should be complete by Friday. Good. Conference room B in 15 minutes for the briefing." "On my way." Marcus ended the call and grabbed his briefcase from the passenger seat. The Henderson case involved a complex wire fraud scheme that had defrauded elderly investors out of nearly $2 million. It was important work, the kind of case that could send career criminals to federal prison for decades. But as he walked through the security checkpoint and took the elevator to the 6th floor, Marcus found his thoughts drifting back to Jefferson Middle School and a 13-year-old girl with a violin case who just wanted to learn music without being terrorized for her talents. The day was just beginning, and he had a feeling it was going to be more complicated than he'd anticipated. The Henderson case briefing ran longer than expected. By the time Marcus emerged from the federal building, it was nearly 6 p.m., and his phone showed 4 missed calls from Jefferson Middle School. His stomach dropped as he listened to the voicemail from Principal Janet Morrison. "Mr. Thompson, this is Principal Morrison at Jefferson Middle School. I need you to come in tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to discuss an incident involving your daughter, Emma, and some other students. Please call my office to confirm your attendance." Marcus immediately dialed Emma's cell phone while walking to his car. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight with anxiety. "Dad, are you coming to get me? I'm on my way. Are you okay? What happened? I'm at the library with Isabella. Can you pick us both up? Her mum's working late and can't get here until 7. Marcus checked his watch. The school library stayed open until 6:30 for students waiting for rides. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Emma, what exactly happened today?" There was a pause. "It's complicated. I'll explain when you get here." The drive to Jefferson felt longer than usual. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. None of them good. Emma had never been in serious trouble at school, and the fact that Isabella was involved suggested this was connected to the morning's bullying incident. He found both girls sitting at a corner table in the library, their homework spread out but obviously untouched. Emma's usually perfect ponytail was disheveled, and Isabella's eyes were red-rimmed. They looked up as he approached, relief evident on their faces. "Let's go," Marcus said quietly, helping them gather their belongings. The 3 of them walked to the parking lot in silence. Once they were all in the Explorer with the doors closed, Marcus turned around to face them. "Okay, talk to me." Emma glanced at Isabella, who nodded encouragingly. "You know what happened this morning with Tyler and those kids bothering Isabella?" "I do. Well, apparently Tyler didn't like being embarrassed in front of everyone. So, at lunch, he started telling people that Isabella got you to threaten them." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "What exactly did he say?" "That you're some kind of federal agent, and you told them you'd have them arrested if they didn't leave Isabella alone." Emma continued. "He made it sound like Isabella was using her connections to intimidate people." Isabella spoke up for the first time. "I never said anything about who you were or what you do for work. I just said Emma's dad helped me out." "I know," Marcus said gently. "What happened next?" Emma took a deep breath. By 5th period, the school was talking about it. Some kids were saying Isabella thinks she's too good for Jefferson and has to get adults to fight her battles. Others were saying Tyler was lying because he got caught being a jerk. And then Chloe decided to make a video. Marcus's blood pressure spiked. What kind of video? Isabella pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She posted it on TikTok and Instagram. It already has over 300 views. The video was worse than Marcus had imagined. Chloe had filmed herself in what appeared to be a school bathroom, speaking in concerned, innocent tones about how some new students thought they could use their parents' jobs to intimidate other kids. She never mentioned Isabella by name, but the context made it obvious who she was talking about. "I'm not trying to cause drama," Chloe said to the camera. "But it's really unfair when someone uses their daddy's government job to threaten middle schoolers. Like we're just kids trying to be friendly, and suddenly we're being treated like criminals. It's honestly scary." The video had dozens of comments, most of them supportive of Chloe. Several mentioned Isabella specifically, calling her entitled and stuck up. A few suggested she should go back to her old school if she couldn't handle normal social interactions. Marcus handed the phone back to Isabella, his mind already working through the implications. This was a character assassination, sophisticated and devastating. Chloe had positioned herself as the victim while painting Isabella as a privileged bully who hid behind her father's authority. "There's more," Emma said quietly. "During the 7th period, someone started a group chat called Jefferson Drama Alert and added like 50 people to it. They've been sharing the video and making up stories about Isabella's family." "What kind of stories?" Isabella wiped her eyes. "They're saying my mom is probably here illegally, and that's why we moved to Riverside, and that you threatened to have ICE investigate their families if they didn't leave me alone." Marcus felt something cold and dangerous settle in his chest. This wasn't a middle school drama anymore. This was targeted harassment with potentially serious consequences. "None of that is true," he said firmly. "Isabella, where is your family?" "Originally from Chicago," she replied. "My mom got a job at Riverside General Hospital as a surgical nurse. That's why we moved here. We're both American citizens. My grandparents came here from Mexico in the 1960s, Marcus nodded. The immigration angle was particularly vicious because it tapped into broader social tensions and could put Isabella's family at real risk if the rumors spread beyond the school. "Emma, how did you get involved in this?" His daughter looked uncomfortable. "When I heard what people were saying about Isabella, I tried to set the record straight. I told them that you didn't threaten anyone, you just asked if Isabella wanted to play violin, and when she said no, you suggested everyone head to class. That was the right thing to do." "Yeah, but Tyler said I was lying to protect my dad's reputation. He started saying that maybe our whole family has something to hide, and that's why you got so angry about people asking innocent questions." Marcus rubbed his temples. The situation was escalating exactly the way these things did in the digital age, false narratives spreading faster than truth, with each retelling becoming more extreme. "What happened next?" "I may have lost my temper a little," Emma admitted. "I told Tyler he was a spoiled brat who'd never faced real consequences for anything in his life, and that's why he didn't recognize actual authority when he saw it." "Emma, I know, I shouldn't have said that. But he was being such a jerk, and people were starting to believe his version of what happened." Isabella spoke up again. "That's when Tyler said Emma was just as entitled as me, and that our dads probably worked together to cover up each other's mistakes." Marcus was beginning to understand why Principal Morrison had called. This wasn't just about the morning's incident anymore. It had evolved into something that could have serious implications for multiple families. "So what exactly happened that got you called to the principal's office?" Emma and Isabella exchanged another look. "Tyler kept pushing," Emma said. "He started saying that maybe someone should look into what kind of federal agent gets so worked up about middle school kids, asking questions. He was implying that you might be corrupt or something, and I told him that if he wanted to find out what kind of federal agent my dad is, he should keep running his mouth and see what happens. Marcus closed his eyes. Emma, please tell me. I didn't threaten him, Emma said quickly, but I may have suggested that people who make false accusations about federal employees sometimes find themselves under investigation for filing false reports. The silence in the car stretched for several seconds. Marcus could see exactly how this would look to school administrators. His daughter apparently threatening other students with federal investigations just hours after he'd been accused of doing the same thing. How did this end up in the principal's office? Someone recorded Emma saying that, Isabella said quietly, and Tyler's mom is on the school board, so when he went home and told her about it, she called the principal, Marcus finished, and now there's a meeting tomorrow morning. I'm sorry, Dad, Emma said, tears starting to form. I was just trying to help Isabella, and I made everything worse. Marcus turned around and put the car in drive. You were trying to defend your friend from harassment and false accusations. That's not something to apologize for. But I made threats. You repeated information that's actually true, Marcus corrected. Filing false reports about federal employees is a crime. You didn't threaten anyone with anything that isn't already the law. He pulled out of the school parking lot and headed toward Isabella's neighborhood. But we need to be smart about how we handle this from here on out. What do you mean? Isabella asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking through options. His training had taught him that when someone tried to control a narrative through misinformation, the best response was usually transparency and documentation. I mean, it's time to stop. Playing defense, he said finally. Isabella, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Okay. This morning, when Tyler and Chloe were bothering you, did anyone record what actually happened? Isabella thought for a moment. I think so. There were a lot of phones out, but I don't know if anyone got the whole thing. Emma, do you know anyone who might have recorded the actual incident? Emma was already pulling out her phone. Maybe. Let me check with some people. While Emma texted, Marcus continued driving toward Isabella's address. The neighborhood was middle-class suburban, with well-maintained lawns and the kind of quiet streets that suggested families chose to live here specifically for the schools and safety. Isabella, what time does your mum get home from work? Usually. Around 7. She's pulling a double shift today, so maybe 8. Marcus checked the time. It was already 6:45. I think I should talk to her about what's happening. This has gone beyond typical school drama, and she needs to know what you're dealing with. She's going to be so upset, Isabella said quietly. She chose Riverside specifically because she heard Jefferson was a good school without a lot of bullying. Problems. This isn't your fault, Marcus said firmly, and it's not your mum's fault for moving here. This is about a few kids who don't know how to handle someone being different from them. Emma's phone buzzed. Dad, I've got something. Jake Morrison, that's the principal's nephew. He was walking to class when the whole thing happened this morning. He says he recorded some of it because he thought it was going to turn into a fight. Can he send you the video? He already did. Emma's fingers flew across her phone screen. Dad, you need to see this. Emma handed him the phone as he pulled into Isabella's driveway. The video was shaky and the audio wasn't perfect, but it clearly showed the circle of students around Isabella, their aggressive posturing, and her obvious distress. Most importantly, it captured Marcus's intervention exactly as it had happened, calm, reasonable, and focused entirely on giving Isabella a choice about whether she wanted to perform. The video also caught Tyler's reaction when Marcus asked Isabella directly what she wanted to do. The boy's face showed surprise and frustration, as if the idea that Isabella's preferences mattered hadn't occurred to him. This is good, Marcus said, handing the phone back. This shows exactly what happened. with no room for alternative interpretations. But will it matter? Isabella asked. I mean, Chloe's video already has hundreds of views, and people seem to believe her version. Marcus smiled grimly. Isabella, I've spent my entire career dealing with people who think they can control the truth by controlling the story. The thing about lies is that they only work if nobody bothers to check the facts. A Honda Civic pulled into the driveway behind them. A woman in scrubs got out, looking tired but alert. She had Isabella's dark hair and intelligent eyes, along with the kind of determined expression that suggested she'd worked hard for everything she'd achieved. That's my mom, Isabella said unnecessarily. Dr. Maria Santos approached the explorer. With the cautious friendliness of someone who wasn't sure what to expect, Marcus rolled down his window. Dr. Santos? I'm Marcus Thompson, Emma's father. I think we need to talk. Dr. Maria Santos listened to the entire story without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each detail. They had moved to her living room after the initial introductions, with Emma and Isabella doing homework at the kitchen table while the adults talked. So let me understand this correctly, Maria said, her voice controlled, but tense. My daughter was being harassed this morning. You intervene appropriately, and now these children are spreading lies about both of our families on social media. Marcus nodded. That's the essence of it, but there's more we need to discuss. He explained about the immigration rumors, the group chat, and the escalating nature of the harassment. Maria's face hardened as she absorbed the implications. They're targeting Isabella specifically because she's academically gifted and new, Marcus continued, but they're using tactics that go way beyond typical middle school bullying. This is coordinated character assassination. Maria stood up and began pacing. I came to Riverside because I thought it would be safer for Isabella. Better schools, less violence, more opportunities. I never imagined she'd face this kind of sophisticated harassment from 13-year-olds. Dr. Santos, what's your immigration status? I need to know, because if there are any vulnerabilities there, we need to be prepared. We're both natural-born citizens, Maria said firmly. I was born in San Antonio. Isabella was born in Chicago. My parents immigrated legally in 1963. I have all the documentation if needed. Marcus felt some tension ease. Good. That removes one weapon from their arsenal, but we still need to deal with the meeting tomorrow morning. What exactly are they going to try to do? Marcus had been thinking about this during the drive over. Based on the principal's voicemail and what the girls told me, they're going to try to flip the script. They'll make Emma and me the aggressors, paint Tyler and his friends as the victims, and position the school as having to protect students from intimidation by federal law enforcement. Can they do that? They can try, but they're making a fundamental mistake. They think this is a public relations battle where the loudest voice wins. They don't understand that when you make false accusations about federal employees, it becomes a legal matter. Maria stopped pacing and looked at him directly. What kind of federal employee are you exactly? I'm a criminal investigator with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I specialize in fraud, money laundering, and public corruption cases. The silence stretched for several seconds. Maria sat back down, processing this information. So when Tyler's mother demands that the school take action against you for intimidating her son, she's going to find out that filing false complaints about federal agents is a federal crime, Marcus finished, and that investigators who specialize in corruption cases tend to be very thorough when someone tries to manipulate institutions through lies and political pressure. From the kitchen, they could hear the girls discussing their math homework, normal teenage problems that seemed almost surreal given the adult complexities swirling around them. What do you think is going to happen tomorrow? Maria asked. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her several screenshots Emma had forwarded. I think Tyler's mother, Sandra Marsh, is going to walk into that meeting expecting to intimidate a single father and an immigrant family into backing down. She's probably planning to use her husband's money and her school board connections to make this go away quietly. And instead she's going to find out that her son has been engaged in systematic harassment, that she's enabled it by not addressing his behavior, and that the false statements she's made about federal employees could result in serious legal consequences for her entire family. Maria looked uncertain. Marcus, I appreciate everything you've done for Isabella, but I don't want this to escalate into something that could hurt the girls. They still have to go to school here. Marcus understood her concern. As a single mother in a new town, Maria couldn't afford to make enemies of powerful families or school administrators. But he also knew that backing down now would only embolden the bullies and make Isabella's life worse. Dr. Santos, I respect your position, but I think you're underestimating how serious this has already become. This isn't going to go away if we apologize and hope for the best. These kids have tasted blood, and they're not going to stop until someone makes them stop. Before Maria could respond, Emma appeared in the doorway. Dad, Isabella's getting more messages. Both adults turned toward the kitchen, where Isabella was staring at her phone with a stricken expression. What kind of messages? Marcus asked, walking over to her. Isabella held up her phone with shaking hands. The screen showed a series of direct messages on Instagram, all from accounts with fake names and profile pictures. Go back to Mexico where you belong. Stop hiding behind your fake daddy's fake badge. Jefferson doesn't want illegals and liars. Your mom probably bought her nursing license. Marcus felt something cold and dangerous settle in his chest. This had crossed the line from bullying into hate speech and targeted harassment. Worse, the messages suggested that the attackers had researched Isabella's background and her mother's profession. When did these start coming in? He asked. About an hour ago, Isabella replied, tears streaming down her face. There are more on TikTok and Snapchat. Someone created fake accounts just to send them. Maria looked over Marcus's shoulder at the messages, her face going pale. They're targeting my profession now? How do they even know I'm a nurse? Emma was already typing on her phone. Chloe's mom works in hospital administration. She probably looked up Dr. Santos in the employee directory. Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. This wasn't random harassment by angry teenagers. This was a coordinated attack involving adults who had access to professional and personal information. Dr. Santos, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Maria nodded, though she looked increasingly worried. Have you had any problems at the hospital? Any conflicts with administrators or other staff members? Anything that might make someone want to create professional difficulties for you? Maria thought for a moment. There was an incident last month. I reported to a doctor for coming to work impaired. He was removed from surgery pending investigation, but he had friends in administration who weren't happy about it. What was the doctor's name? Dr. Richard Brennan. Why? Emma looked up from her phone. Brennan? That's Chloe's last name. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Marcus felt the investigation instincts that had served him for 15 years kick into high gear. This wasn't about middle school social dynamics anymore. This was about professional retaliation being carried out through harassment of a colleague's child. Dr. Santos, I need you to gather all documentation related to your report about Dr. Brennan. Every email, every formal complaint, every witness statement. Can you do that tonight? Yes, but why? Because tomorrow morning's meeting just became a lot more complicated. Sandra Marsh thinks she's going to use her school board connections to intimidate us into silence. She doesn't know that her son's harassment campaign is being orchestrated by adults who are trying to destroy your career in retaliation for doing your job. Maria sat down heavily. This is insane. I reported impaired driving because I was worried about patient safety. How does that turn into attacking my daughter? Because when people can't win on the merits, they attack the messenger, Marcus replied. And they're counting on you being too scared or too isolated to fight back. Isabella looked up from her phone, where more hateful messages were still arriving. What are we going to do? Marcus looked at the scared 13-year-old girl, then at her mother, who had worked so hard to build a better life for them both. He thought about Emma, who had tried to stand up for her friend and found herself caught in something much bigger than she could handle alone. We're going to end this, he said quietly. All of it. He pulled out his own phone and began scrolling through his contacts. Dr. Santos, do you trust me? Maria looked at her daughter, then back at Marcus. I don't have much choice, do I? You always have choices, but some of them are better than others. Marcus found the number he was looking for. I'm going to make some calls tonight. By tomorrow morning, we're going to know exactly who's behind this harassment campaign and what their real motivations are. What do you want me to do? Document everything. Print out all the social media posts, save all the messages, get copies of your professional communications with Dr. Brennan, and most importantly, don't let anyone convince you that this is normal, or that you should just accept it. Marcus's phone was already ringing. As he dialed his partner's number, Agent Sarah Chen answered on the second ring. Marcus, it's pretty late for a work call. Sarah, I need a favor. I've got a situation that might involve federal civil rights violations, and I need some background research done tonight. What kind of situation? Marcus looked at Isabella, still receiving hateful messages on her phone, and at Maria, who had risked her career to report an impaired doctor and was now facing retaliation through attacks on her child. The kind where people think they can use their money and connections to destroy families who won't stay quiet about professional misconduct. The kind where harassment of minors is being used as a weapon in adult conflicts. Send me the details. I'll see what I can find. After ending the call, Marcus turned back to Maria and the girls. Tomorrow morning, we're walking into that meeting with full documentation of everything that's happened, complete background information on everyone involved, and a clear understanding of what laws have been broken. And then what? Maria asked. Marcus smiled grimly. And then Sandra Marsh and her friends are going to find out what happens when you target the wrong family. Emma looked up from her homework. Dad, are you sure about this? I mean, these people have a lot of money and influence. Emma, I've spent my career taking down people who thought their money and influence made them untouchable. The bigger they think they are, the harder they fall when the truth comes out. Isabella's phone buzzed with another message. This time, instead of looking scared, she held it up for everyone to see. They're saying they're going to get my mom fired from the hospital. Marcus took a screenshot of the message, then looked directly at Isabella. They just made a very serious mistake. Threatening someone's employment in retaliation for reporting professional misconduct is a federal crime. And unlike most of the garbage they've been posting, this one comes with prison time. He turned to Maria. Dr. Santos, I know this is scary and overwhelming, but I need you to understand something important. You're not fighting this alone anymore, and the people who are targeting your family have no idea what they've gotten themselves into. Maria looked at her daughter, then at Emma, then back at Marcus. What do you need me to do? Be ready to tell the truth tomorrow morning. All of it. Don't hold anything back. Don't try to minimize what's happened, and don't let anyone convince you that you're overreacting. Marcus's phone rang again. This time it was Principal Morrison. Mr. Thompson, I hope you don't mind me calling this late. I wanted to discuss some additional concerns that have come to my attention regarding tomorrow's meeting. What kind of concerns? Well, I've received several calls from parents about social media posts involving your daughter and Isabella Santos. There are also some questions about your professional background that the school board feels need to be addressed. Marcus could hear the careful neutrality in the principal's voice. She was trying to gauge how he would react to pressure, probably based on instructions from Sandra Marsh or other board members. Principal. Morrison, I appreciate the call. I think it would be helpful if you could tell me exactly who has been contacting you and what specific concerns they've raised. Well, that's rather sensitive information. Not when it involves false accusations about federal employees and harassment of minors. In fact, I think you'll find that transparency is going to be very important for everyone involved in this situation. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. Mr. Thompson, perhaps we should discuss this tomorrow morning in a more formal setting. I look forward to it, Marcus replied. And Principal Morrison, you might want to make sure that everyone who plans to attend that meeting understands that making false statements about federal investigations or threatening witnesses can have serious legal consequences. After ending the call, Marcus turned back to the group in the kitchen. 3 pairs of eyes were watching him with expressions ranging from hope to worry to determination. "All right," he said. "Let's get to work. We have a lot to accomplish before." Tomorrow morning, Marcus arrived at the federal building at 6 a.m., 2 hours before the school meeting. Agent Sarah Chen was already waiting in his office with 3 thick folders and a laptop displaying multiple browser tabs. "You weren't kidding about this being complicated," Sarah said without preamble. "Dr. Richard Brennan has quite a history." Marcus poured coffee from the machine in the corner and sat down across from his partner. "What did you find?" Sarah opened the first folder. "Dr. Brennan has been investigated for substance abuse twice in the past 5 years. Both times, the complaints were withdrawn after the accusers faced professional difficulties. Dr. Jennifer Walsh transferred to a hospital in Phoenix after reporting him in 2019. Dr. Michael Torres left medicine entirely after filing a complaint in 2021. And now Dr. Santos reports him, and suddenly her daughter is being harassed by his daughter? It gets worse. Sandra Marsh, that's Tyler's mother, sits on the hospital board of directors in addition to the school board. She's been Brennan's most vocal supporter during his disciplinary proceedings. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place. So we have a documented pattern of retaliation against medical professionals who report Brennan's misconduct, and now they're using their children to target the latest whistleblower. Sarah nodded. "There's more. I pulled financial records for the Marsh family's car dealerships. They've donated over $50,000 to Jefferson Middle School in the past 2 years, specifically for technology upgrades and administrative salaries. They own the principal, potentially. But here's the interesting part. I also found social media analytics for the harassment campaign against Isabella Santos." Sarah opened her laptop and turned it toward Marcus. The screen showed a network analysis of the fake accounts that had been sending threatening messages. These accounts were all created within a 6-hour window yesterday evening. They're using sophisticated VPN services to hide their IP addresses, and the messaging patterns suggest coordination rather than organic harassment. Marcus studied the data. This isn't angry teenagers. This is adults running a systematic intimidation campaign. That's what I thought too, so I dug deeper into the metadata. Sarah clicked to another tab. The accounts were funded using prepaid debit cards purchased at the same CVS pharmacy. The store is 3 blocks from Riverside General Hospital. Someone with access to the hospital is funding this harassment campaign. It gets better. I cross-referenced the purchase times with hospital staff schedules. Dr. Richard Brennan clocked out for lunch at exactly the time those cards were purchased. Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. What had started as middle school bullying was actually a criminal conspiracy involving medical professionals, school board members, and organized harassment of a minor. "Sarah, what are we looking at in terms of federal charges?" "Civil rights. Violations under 18 U.S.C. 241, conspiracy against rights. Intimidation of a witness under 18 U.S.C. 1512, wire fraud for using electronic communications to carry out the scheme, and depending on how far this goes, potentially RICO charges if we can prove it's part of an ongoing criminal enterprise. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad, Isabella got a call this morning. Someone claiming to be from Immigration Services saying they're investigating her family's legal status." Marcus showed the message to Sarah, who whistled low. "That's impersonating a federal officer. That's 5 years minimum. We need to move fast. The school meeting is in 90 minutes, and I suspect they're planning to escalate the pressure today." Sarah was already reaching for her phone. "I'll get a team to the school to document everything. We should also have someone at the hospital, in case they try to retaliate against Dr. Santos professionally." "Good. I want full surveillance on the Brennan and Marsh families, and I want to know everyone who's been in contact with them in the past 48 hours. Marcus gathered his files and headed for the door. "Sarah, one more thing. I want you to run a full background check on Principal Morrison. If the Marsh family owns the school board, I want to know how deep that corruption goes." The drive to Jefferson Middle School felt different this morning. Instead of going in as a concerned parent hoping to resolve a misunderstanding, Marcus was entering as a federal investigator with evidence of multiple crimes. The distinction mattered more than most people understood. He parked next to Dr. Santos's Honda Civic and saw her waiting by the main entrance with Isabella and Emma. All three looked nervous but determined. "Dr. Santos, how are you holding up?" "I've been better," Maria replied. "I spent most of the night documenting everything related to Dr. Brennan. I also called the hospital's legal department and reported the Immigration Services call." "Good thinking. What did they say?" "They're taking it very seriously. Apparently, there have been other irregularities lately. Staff schedules being accessed inappropriately, employee personal information being shared without authorization. They're starting an internal investigation." Marcus nodded. "The criminal enterprise was larger than they'd initially thought. Are you ready for this meeting?" "I think so. But Marcus, I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead. Are you planning to arrest people today? Because if this turns into a federal case, I need to know what Isabella and I are getting into." It was a fair question. Maria had every right to understand the potential consequences of the path they were choosing. "Dr. Santos, I'm not going into that meeting planning to arrest anyone. But I am going in with evidence of serious crimes, and if people continue to make incriminating statements or threats, I'm going to have to act on that evidence." Maria looked at her daughter, who was clutching her backpack straps the same way. She'd held her violin case yesterday morning. "Mom, we can't let them keep doing this to other people," Isabella said quietly. "If Dr. Brennan really is impaired, and they're covering for him, someone could get hurt." Marcus felt a surge of respect for the 13-year-old. Despite everything she'd been through, she was thinking about the bigger picture. "Isabella's right," he said. "This isn't just about bullying anymore. This is about people using their power to silence anyone who threatens them. And if we don't stop it here, it's going to keep happening." Emma, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "Dad, what if they try to get you in trouble with your job? I mean, they could say you used your federal position inappropriately." "Emma, everything I've done has been completely legal and appropriate. I intervened in a bullying situation as a parent, and I investigated crimes as a federal agent. The two roles never overlapped inappropriately. The school doors opened, and Principal Morrison appeared, looking harried and uncomfortable. "Mr. Thompson, Dr. Santos, we're ready for you in the conference room." As they walked through the hallways, Marcus noticed the school seemed unusually quiet for 8 a.m. Most students would normally be arriving for first period, but the parking lot had been nearly empty. "Principal Morrison, where are all the students? We've delayed the start of classes by an hour to deal with this situation privately," she replied without looking back. They entered a conference room that Marcus hadn't expected. Instead of the small meeting he'd anticipated, the room contained nearly a dozen people seated around a large oval table. He recognized Sandra Marsh immediately, tall, blonde, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never being told no. Next to her sat a man in an expensive suit who was probably her husband. Dr. Richard Brennan was also present, along with two people Marcus didn't recognize, but who carried themselves like attorneys. At the head of the table sat an older man with silver hair and cold eyes, likely the school board chairman. "This is quite a turnout," Marcus observed, taking a seat across from Sandra Marsh. "I wasn't aware this had become a board-level issue." The silver-haired man leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Robert Sterling, chairman of the Jefferson School Board. We've received some very serious allegations about your conduct on school property, and we felt it was important to address them at the highest level." Marcus pulled out a small digital recorder and placed it on the table. "I hope you don't mind if I record this meeting. Given the seriousness of the allegations, I want to make sure everyone's statements are accurately documented." The lawyers immediately began whispering to their clients. Sandra Marsh's face flushed red. "That won't be necessary," Sterling said quickly. "Actually, it will be," Marcus replied calmly. "When federal employees are accused of misconduct, we're required to document all related proceedings. I'm sure you understand." Dr. Brennan spoke for the first time. "Mr. Thompson, I think we're all here to resolve this matter quietly and move forward. Recording everything seems unnecessarily adversarial." Marcus looked directly at Brennan. "Dr. Brennan, I'm curious about your involvement in this meeting. As far as I know, this is about a school incident involving your daughter and two other students. What's your interest in the outcome?" The question hung in the air. Brennan's lawyers were shaking their heads, but he was already answering. "My daughter was traumatized by your aggressive behavior yesterday morning. As her father, I have every right to be here." "I see. And the fact that Dr. Santos recently filed a professional complaint against you for working while impaired, that's not relevant to your interest in this case?" The silence in the room was deafening. Sandra Marsh's lawyer grabbed her arm as she started to stand up. "How dare you?" Marsh began. "Mrs. Marsh," Marcus interrupted, "I'd be very careful about what you say next. Making false statements about federal investigations is a serious crime." Sterling tried to regain control. "Mr. Thompson, we're here to discuss your intimidation of students, not to relitigate medical professional disputes." Marcus opened one of his folders and placed several photographs on the table. They showed screenshots of the hateful messages Isabella had received, the coordinated social media attacks, and the network analysis Sarah had prepared. "Mr. Sterling, you're absolutely right. We're here to discuss intimidation. Specifically, the systematic harassment and intimidation of a 13-year-old girl and her mother in retaliation for reporting professional misconduct." He placed another set of documents on the table. "These are financial records showing that prepaid debit cards used to fund the harassment campaign were purchased by Dr. Brennan during his lunch break yesterday." Brennan's face went white. His lawyers were frantically scribbling notes. "We're also here to discuss the phone call Isabella Santos received this morning from someone impersonating an immigration services officer," Marcus continued. "That's a federal felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison." Maria spoke for the first time since entering the room. "I want to say something." Sterling nodded nervously. "I came to Riverside to give my daughter a better life and to serve this community as a medical professional. When I saw Dr. Brennan arrive for surgery with alcohol on his breath, I reported it because patient safety comes first. I never imagined that doing my job would result in my child being terrorized." She looked directly at Sandra Marsh. "Mrs. Marsh, your son wasn't just asking innocent questions yesterday morning. He was leading a coordinated attack designed to humiliate and isolate my daughter. And when that didn't work, you and your friends decided to escalate to criminal harassment. Sandra Marsh finally spoke, her voice shaking with rage. How dare you come into our community and start making accusations about respected professionals? Dr. Brennan has served this hospital for 15 years. Mrs. Marsh, Marcus said quietly, you just admitted to participating in a conspiracy to protect Dr. Brennan from the consequences of professional misconduct. I hope your lawyers are taking good notes. The room erupted into whispered conferences between the various parties and their attorneys. Marcus remained calm, watching as the web of lies and intimidation collapsed under the weight of evidence and recorded admissions. Principal Morrison, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally found her voice. Perhaps we should take a brief recess to allow everyone to consult with their counsel. That's an excellent idea, Marcus agreed. But before we do, I want everyone to understand something clearly. He stood up and looked around the room. This investigation is now a federal matter involving multiple felonies. Anyone who continues to participate in the harassment or intimidation of witnesses will be subject to immediate arrest. Anyone who attempts to retaliate against Dr. Santos professionally will face additional charges. Marcus picked up his recorder and files. When we reconvene, I suggest everyone be prepared to tell the truth about their involvement in this conspiracy, because the alternative is going to be much worse than a school board meeting. The 15-minute recess stretched into an hour as lawyers huddled with their clients in separate corners of Jefferson Middle School. Marcus used the time to coordinate with Agent Chen, who had positioned surveillance teams around both the hospital and the school. Marcus, we've got movement at Riverside General. Sarah's voice crackled through his earpiece. Dr. Brennan called in sick this morning, but hospital security cameras show him in the parking lot making phone calls. Looks like he's trying to coordinate damage control. Marcus stepped into an empty classroom to continue the conversation privately. Any word on the Immigration Services impersonation? We traced the call. It came from a burner phone purchased at the same CVS where the debit cards were bought. The phone pinged cell towers near the Marsh residence this morning. So Sandra Marsh is directly involved in federal crimes now. That changes everything. When the meeting reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The aggressive confidence from earlier had been replaced by careful, lawyer-coached responses. Dr. Brennan looked like he hadn't slept, and Sandra Marsh avoided eye contact entirely. Board. Chairman Sterling cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson, after consulting with our legal counsel, we'd like to propose a resolution that addresses everyone's concerns. Marcus remained standing. I'm listening. The school district is prepared to transfer Tyler Marsh and Chloe Brennan to alternative educational placements to ensure there are no further conflicts with Isabella Santos. We're also implementing new anti-bullying protocols and sensitivity training for all students. And what about the criminal activity? Sterling's composure cracked slightly. We're hoping that with appropriate educational interventions and family counseling, we can avoid involving law enforcement in what is essentially a misunderstanding between children. Marcus almost laughed. Mr. Sterling, we're past the point of calling this a misunderstanding. Federal agents don't investigate misunderstandings. Sandra Marsh's lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in a navy suit, leaned forward. Agent Thompson, my client acknowledges that emotions ran high and some poor decisions were made. She's prepared to make a substantial donation to anti-bullying programs and issue a public apology. Your client impersonated a federal officer this morning, Marcus replied. You can't donate your way out of a felony. The lawyer's face went pale. We have no knowledge of any such call. Marcus pulled out his phone and played an audio recording. Sandra Marsh's voice, slightly disguised but still recognizable, came through the speakers. "This is Agent Rodriguez from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We've received a complaint about the legal status of Isabella Santos and her mother. We'll need to schedule an interview." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Brennan looked like he was going to be sick. That recording was made by Isabella Santos herself when she became suspicious of the caller's legitimacy, Marcus continued. "Voice analysis confirms it's Mrs. Marsh attempting to disguise her identity." Sandra Marsh finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I was trying to protect my son. When that girl's father threatened him, I never threatened anyone," Marcus interrupted, "but you've just confessed to impersonating a federal officer, which is a serious felony." Principal Morrison, who had been increasingly uncomfortable throughout the meeting, stood up. "Perhaps we should involve the local police at this point." "The local police don't have jurisdiction over federal crimes," Marcus replied. "But I appreciate your cooperation in documenting these admissions." Dr. Brennan's lawyer, who had been frantically typing on his laptop, finally looked up. "Agent Thompson, my client would like to discuss a possible cooperation agreement." Marcus turned his attention to the doctor. "What kind of cooperation?" "Dr. Brennan is prepared to admit his substance abuse issues and seek treatment. He's also willing to provide information about other instances where patients may have been put at risk due to his condition. And the harassment campaign against Dr. Santos and her daughter." Brennan looked at Sandra Marsh, then back at Marcus. "That was Sandra's idea. She said if we could discredit Dr. Santos, the hospital board would dismiss her complaint and everything would go back to normal." Sandra Marsh shot to her feet. "Richard, shut up. Don't say another word." But Dr. Brennan continued, the words pouring out as if a dam had broken. "She said her husband knew people who could create social media problems for the family. She had access to employee records through her board position so she could provide personal information for the harassment campaign." Marcus looked at his digital recorder, making sure it was still running. "Dr. Brennan, are you saying that Mrs. Marsh used her position on the hospital board to access confidential employee information for the purpose of intimidating a colleague who reported your misconduct?" "Yes. She also knew about the other doctors who had reported me before. She told me how they made their lives difficult until they left." Sterling was frantically scribbling notes while the lawyers tried to control their clients. The meeting had become a full confession session, with each revelation more damaging than the last. Emma, who had been quietly listening from her seat next to Isabella, suddenly spoke up. "Mrs. Marsh, why did you hate Isabella so much? She never did anything to you." Sandra Marsh turned toward Emma with something approaching fury. "Your father had no right to interfere in our children's business. We've built something good here in Riverside, and people like her," she pointed at Isabella, "come in and try to tear it down with their accusations and their special treatment." "Mrs. Marsh," Marcus said quietly, "you're confessing to targeting a child because her mother reported professional misconduct that could have endangered patients. Do you understand how that sounds?" For the first time since the meeting began, Sandra Marsh seemed to realize the magnitude of what she'd been saying. Her face went white as she looked around the room at the lawyers, the recording device, and the federal agent who had just documented her admissions. "I want to stop talking now," she whispered. "That's probably wise," Marcus agreed. "But Mrs. Marsh, the damage is already done. You've confessed to multiple federal crimes in front of witnesses and on tape." Agent Chen's voice crackled through his earpiece again. "Marcus, we've got Tyler Marsh and Chloe Brennan in custody. They were caught vandalizing Dr. Santos's car in the hospital parking lot. They spray-painted 'Go Home Illegals' across the windshield." Marcus pressed his earpiece to acknowledge the message, then looked around the room. Ladies and gentlemen, this investigation has just expanded again. Tyler Marsh and Chloe Brennan have been arrested for committing a hate crime on hospital property. Dr. Brennan buried his face in his hands. This is insane. How did it get this far out of control? Marcus looked at the broken man across the table. Dr. Brennan, it got this far because when people tried to hold you accountable for endangering patients, you and your friends decided to destroy them instead of addressing the problem. He turned to Sandra Marsh. And Mrs. Marsh, it got this far because you thought your money and connections made you untouchable. You thought you could terrorize a 13-year-old girl and her mother with no consequences. Marcus began packing his files. Here's what's going to happen next. Federal agents are going to arrest everyone involved in this conspiracy. The hospital board is going to face an investigation for corruption and retaliation. And Dr. Santos and Isabella are going to be protected by the full weight of federal law enforcement. He looked directly at Principal Morrison. As for Jefferson Middle School, you're going to implement real anti-bullying protocols, not the cosmetic changes you were planning. And you're going to make sure that every student and parent understands that harassment and intimidation will result in criminal charges, not just detention. Sterling made one last attempt to salvage the situation. Agent Thompson, surely we can find a resolution that doesn't involve destroying the lives of otherwise decent people who made mistakes. Marcus paused at the door. Mr. Sterling, Isabella. Santos is 13 years old. She moved to a new town, started at a new school, and tried to pursue her love of music. For that, she was terrorized, threatened, and subjected to racist harassment by adults who should have known better. He looked around the room one final time. The people who destroyed lives here weren't the ones who asked for help. They were the ones who decided that a child's safety was less important than protecting their own interests. As Marcus left the conference room with Maria, Isabella, and Emma, he could hear lawyers frantically making phone calls and clients demanding to know how badly they damaged themselves with their admissions. What happens now? Maria asked as they walked toward the parking lot. Now the justice system takes over, Marcus replied. But the important thing is that it's over for you and Isabella. No one is going to risk harassing witnesses in a federal investigation. Isabella looked up at him, with something approaching relief for the first time in 2 days. Do you really think it's over? Marcus smiled at the young girl who had shown more courage than many adults he'd encountered in his career. Isabella, I think you're going to find that Jefferson Middle School is about to become a much better place for students who are different or gifted or just trying to learn. As they reached their cars, Agent Chen pulled up with a full FBI tactical team. The sight of federal agents entering Jefferson Middle School would send a message throughout Riverside that would be remembered for years to come. One more thing, Marcus said to Maria as she buckled Isabella into the passenger seat. Dr. Brennan is going to need to be replaced at the hospital. I suspect they'll be looking for qualified surgeons who understand the importance of professional ethics. Maria smiled for the first time since this whole ordeal began. I'll make sure to mention that to the chief of surgery. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the auditorium of Jefferson Middle School watching Isabella Santos perform a violin solo for the annual spring concert. The transformation in the young girl was remarkable. Gone was the hunched, defensive posture he'd first witnessed. In the school parking lot, in its place, was a confident performer who commanded the stage with grace and skill that left the audience mesmerized. The aftermath of that dramatic school board meeting had rippled through Riverside like an earthquake, touching every institution and family involved. As Isabella's final notes hung in the air and the audience erupted in applause, Marcus reflected on how completely the landscape had changed. Dr. Richard Brennan had pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including conspiracy, wire fraud, and interfering with a federal investigation. His medical license had been permanently revoked, and he was currently serving an 18-month federal sentence. The plea agreement had required him to provide detailed testimony about the culture of retaliation and cover-ups at Riverside General Hospital, leading to a comprehensive federal investigation of the entire medical system. Sandra Marsh had fought the charges initially, hiring expensive attorneys and attempting to use her family's political connections to pressure federal prosecutors. The strategy had backfired spectacularly when FBI agents discovered additional evidence of her involvement in previous retaliation campaigns against hospital whistleblowers. Faced with potential RICO charges that could have sent her to prison for decades, she had eventually accepted a plea deal requiring 5 years in federal prison and forfeiture of her positions on both the hospital and school boards. Tyler Marsh and Chloe Brennan, as juveniles, had been sentenced to community service and mandatory counseling. Tyler was required to spend 200 hours working with immigrant families through a local non-profit organization, while Chloe had been assigned to anti-bullying education programs. Both had written formal apologies to Isabella and were attending different schools under strict supervision, but the most significant changes had occurred at the institutional level. Riverside General Hospital had undergone a complete restructuring of its governance and oversight systems. Dr. Maria Santos had been promoted to Chief of Quality Assurance, a newly created position designed to ensure that medical professionals could report safety concerns without fear of retaliation. The hospital had also implemented anonymous reporting systems and hired independent investigators to handle misconduct allegations. Jefferson Middle School had similarly transformed under new leadership. Principal Morrison had resigned during the federal investigation after evidence emerged of her financial relationships with the Marsh family. Her replacement, Dr. Patricia Williams, had implemented comprehensive anti-bullying protocols that served as a model for other schools in the district. More importantly, the school had created a zero-tolerance policy for any form of retaliation against students who reported harassment or discrimination. As the spring concert continued, Marcus noticed Emma sitting in the front row with her friends, all of them wearing T-shirts supporting the school's new Safe Voices program. Emma had become something of a celebrity at Jefferson for her role in exposing the corruption, but she'd handled the attention with maturity that made Marcus proud. She'd used her platform to advocate for stronger protections for all students, regardless of their background or abilities. The evening's program concluded with Isabella joining the school's chamber ensemble for a complex piece that showcased not only her individual talents, but her ability to work collaboratively with other musicians. The symbolism wasn't lost on Marcus, the girl who had been isolated and targeted, for her gifts was now an integral part of the school's musical community. After the performance, Marcus made his way backstage to congratulate Isabella and her mother. He found them surrounded by other parents and students, all eager to express their appreciation for Isabella's performance and their support for her family. "Mr. Thompson," Isabella called out when she spotted him, "did you hear the announcement during intermission?" Marcus had been working during the first half of the concert and had missed whatever announcement she was referring to. "What announcement?" Dr. Santos, who looked healthier and more relaxed than she had in months, smiled broadly. "Isabella has been accepted to the Riverside Youth Symphony Orchestra. She'll be their youngest member ever." "That's incredible," Marcus said, genuinely pleased. "When do you start?" "Next month," Isabella replied, practically glowing with excitement. "And the best part is, the director said they specifically want musicians who can serve as role models for other young performers facing challenges." Emma appeared at Marcus's shoulder, having made her way through the backstage crowd. "Dad, did you hear about Isabella's scholarship?" "Scholarship?" Dr. Santos explained. "The State University's music department has offered Isabella a full scholarship for their summer intensive program. It's normally only available to high school students, but they're making an exception. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. This was what happened when talented young people were protected and supported rather than torn down by jealousy and hatred. Isabella's gifts hadn't been diminished by the harassment she'd endured. If anything, the experience had strengthened her resolve and deepened her artistry. "There's something else," Emma said, looking unusually serious. "Isabella and I want to tell you about a project we've been working on." The two girls exchanged a look that Marcus recognized from his own daughter's face when she was planning something. "Ambitious. We've been documenting everything that happened," Isabella said. "Not just the bullying and the investigation, but the institutional changes that came afterward. We want to create a presentation that other schools can use to implement similar programs." Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Dr. Williams has already said Jefferson will pilot the program, and the State Education Department wants to see our recommendations." Marcus was impressed, but not entirely surprised. Both girls had demonstrated remarkable resilience and maturity throughout the ordeal, and it made sense that they would want to channel their experience into positive change. "What kind of presentation are you planning?" "We're calling it Voices of Change," Isabella explained. "It combines personal testimony with policy recommendations and practical implementation strategies. We want to show administrators that protecting students isn't just the right thing to do. It's essential for creating effective learning environments." Dr. Santos added, "They've already been invited to present at the State School Board Conference next month. The superintendent's office is providing funding for them to attend." Marcus felt a familiar pride in both girls, not just for their academic achievements, but for their commitment to using their experience to help others. They had taken a traumatic situation and transformed it into a force for positive change. "Have you thought about the emotional impact of reliving everything through your presentation?" Marcus asked. "I want to make sure you're both prepared for how that might feel." Emma nodded seriously. "We've been working with the school counselor, Mrs. Patterson. She's helping us figure out how to share our story in a way that's helpful without being re-traumatizing. And we're not doing it alone," Isabella added. "Dr. Williams has connected us with other students from around the state who've been through similar experiences. It's actually been really healing to know we're not the only ones." As the backstage crowd began to thin out, Marcus found himself in conversation with several other parents who wanted to express their gratitude for his role in exposing the corruption that had been affecting their children's education. Many had stories of their own, instances where they'd suspected favoritism or retaliation but hadn't known how to address it effectively. "The thing is," said Janet Rodriguez, whose daughter was in Emma's science class, "we all knew something was wrong, but we didn't realize how systematic it was. When you have money and connections protecting bad behavior, it takes someone with real authority to break through the wall of silence." Marcus appreciated the sentiment, but he was careful to redirect credit where it belonged. The real heroes here are Dr. Santos for having the courage to report professional misconduct, and Isabella for refusing to be intimidated into silence. I just had the resources to document what was happening and connect it to the broader pattern of corruption. "Don't undersell yourself," said another parent, David Kim, whose son had been bullied the previous year in an incident that was now being re-examined in light of the federal investigation. "You could have chosen to handle this quietly, keep your family out of the spotlight, and let someone else deal with the consequences. Instead, you put your career and reputation on the line to protect kids you barely knew." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Agent Sarah Chen, who had become something of a regular presence at school events since the investigation concluded. She had developed a particular interest in the institutional reforms being implemented and often consulted with Dr. Williams on best practices for creating safe reporting environments. "Marcus, I wanted to give you an update on the broader investigation," Sarah said after greeting the group. The Justice Department has decided to use the Riverside case as a model for a new federal initiative targeting institutional corruption that affects children's safety and education. Marcus was intrigued. What kind of initiative? They're creating specialized task forces in major metropolitan areas specifically focused on investigating corruption in schools, hospitals, and other institutions that serve vulnerable populations. The idea is to identify and disrupt these patterns of retaliation before they can destroy lives. Dr. Santos, who had been listening to the conversation, looked thoughtful. That could make such a difference for families who don't have the resources or knowledge to fight back against institutional power. Exactly, Sarah agreed. And they want you to head up the pilot program. Marcus felt the weight of the offer. Immediately, it was the kind of career opportunity that came along once in a lifetime, a chance to take the skills and experience he'd developed in financial crimes and apply them to protecting children and families from institutional abuse. Where would this be based, he asked. Here in Riverside, actually. The department wants to establish the pilot program in a community that's already demonstrated successful institutional reform. Jefferson Middle School and Riverside General Hospital would serve as case studies for how these changes can be implemented effectively. Emma, who had been listening intently to the adult conversation, suddenly spoke up. "Dad, you should totally do it. Think about how many kids you could help." Isabella nodded enthusiastically. "And it means you'd stay here in Riverside, so we could keep working together on the Voices of Change project." Marcus looked around at the group of parents, students, and colleagues who had become an unexpected community over the past few months. When he'd moved to Riverside after Sarah's death, he'd been looking for a quiet place where he and Emma could rebuild their lives. He'd never imagined becoming the center of a federal investigation that would transform the entire community. "I'll need to think about it," he said finally. "It's a big decision that affects more than just my career." "Of course," Agent Chen replied, "but Marcus, you should know that the department is really excited about this initiative. They think it could revolutionize how federal law enforcement approaches institutional corruption." As the evening wound down and families began heading home, Marcus found himself walking to the parking lot with Dr. Santos, Isabella, and Emma. The spring air was warm and carried the scent of blooming trees that lined the school's main walkway. "Dr. Santos, can I ask you something?" Marcus said as they reached their cars. "Of course. Do you ever regret moving to Riverside? I know the past few months have been incredibly difficult for you and Isabella." Maria considered the question carefully. "Marcus, 3 months ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. The harassment was so intense, and I was so scared for Isabella's safety that I was ready to pack up and move somewhere else." She looked at her daughter, who was animatedly discussing something with Emma. But looking at Isabella now, seeing how she's grown and how she's using her experience to help other kids, I think this might have been exactly where we needed to be. Even with everything you went through, especially because of everything we went through, Isabella learned that she doesn't have to hide her talents or make herself smaller to avoid conflict. She learned that there are adults who will stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. And she learned that her voice matters. Emma called out from where she and Isabella were standing by the school's main sign. "Dad, come look at this!" Marcus and Dr. Santos walked over to see what had captured the girls' attention. There, mounted next to the main entrance sign, was a new plaque that read, "Jefferson Middle School, a safe voice community. Every student has the right to learn, grow, and succeed without fear of harassment or retaliation." "They installed it this afternoon," Isabella explained. "Dr. Williams said it's part of the new transparency initiative. Every policy change, every Program implementation, every success story gets documented and shared publicly. Marcus read the plaque again, noting the careful language that emphasized positive rights rather than just prohibitions against negative behavior. It was a subtle but important distinction that reflected a deeper understanding of how to create genuinely inclusive environments. "You know what this means?" Emma said, grinning at Isabella. "What?" "It means we actually did it. We didn't just stop the bullying, we changed the whole system." As they prepared to leave, Marcus realized that Emma was right. What had started as a simple intervention in a schoolyard harassment situation had evolved into comprehensive institutional reform that would protect countless students for years to come. The drive home was quiet, with Emma dozed off in the passenger seat and Marcus lost in thought about the evening's revelations. The job offer from the Justice Department represented everything he'd worked toward in his career, the opportunity to use his skills and experience to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. But more than that, it represented a chance to stay in the community that had become home for him and Emma, and to continue working with people like Dr. Santos and Isabella, who had shown such courage in the face of institutional intimidation. As he pulled into their driveway, Marcus had already made his decision. Tomorrow, he would call Agent Chen and accept the position. The fight for institutional accountability and children's safety was just beginning, and he intended to be part of it for as long as it took. 6 months after accepting the Justice Department position, Marcus Thompson found himself testifying before a congressional subcommittee on institutional corruption and child protection. The hearing room was packed with representatives from school districts, hospital systems, and advocacy organizations from across the country, all eager to understand how the Riverside model could be replicated in their communities. "Agent Thompson," said Congresswoman Patricia Walsh, the subcommittee chair, "your pilot program has documented over 300 cases of institutional retaliation in just 6 months. Can you explain to the committee how these patterns were able to persist for so long without federal intervention?" Marcus adjusted his microphone and looked out at the crowded hearing room. In the front row, he spotted Dr. Maria Santos and Isabella, who had been invited to testify about their experience as whistleblowers. Emma sat beside them, now 16, and serving as a youth advisor to the Justice Department's new Institutional Accountability Division. Congresswoman Walsh, the answer lies in understanding how institutional power operates at the local level, Marcus began. In Riverside, we discovered that the same individuals often hold positions of authority across multiple institutions: school boards, hospital boards, city councils. When someone reports misconduct in one institution, the retaliation can spread across their entire life. He clicked to his first slide, showing a network diagram that had become infamous in law enforcement circles. This chart maps the overlapping relationships we uncovered in Riverside. Sandra Marsh sat on both the hospital board and school board. Her husband's car dealerships provided vehicles for the school district and hospital system. Dr. Brennan's wife worked in the school district's central office. These weren't separate institutions, they were an interconnected power structure designed to protect itself. Representative James Morrison, a former educator himself, leaned forward. "Agent Thompson, how do you distinguish between legitimate institutional relationships and corrupt conspiracies?" "The key indicator is what happens when someone reports wrongdoing," Marcus replied. "In healthy institutions, reports are investigated promptly, and reporters are protected. In corrupt systems, reporters become targets, and investigations are either superficial or non-existent." He advanced to the next slide, showing statistics from the pilot program. Since implementing the Riverside protocols, we've seen a 400% increase in successful prosecutions of institutional corruption cases. More importantly, we've documented a 60% decrease in retaliation against whistleblowers in communities where the protocols have been adopted. Congresswoman Walsh consulted her notes. Your report mentions something called cascading accountability. Can you explain what that means? Marcus smiled slightly. This was one of the innovations he was most proud of. Cascading accountability means that when we prosecute institutional corruption, we don't just go after the primary perpetrators. We also examine everyone who enabled the corruption through willful blindness or failure to act on obvious warning signs. He clicked a case study slide. For example, in the Riverside investigation, we didn't just prosecute Dr. Brennan for substance abuse and Sandra Marsh for retaliation. We also charged 3 hospital administrators who ignored previous complaints, 2 school board members who participated in cover-ups, and a principal who accepted improper financial benefits in exchange for selective enforcement of policies. The hearing room buzzed with quiet conversations as representatives and advocates absorbed the implications. Representative Morrison spoke again. What kind of resistance have you encountered from institutional leaders? Initially significant resistance, Marcus admitted. Many administrators and board members viewed our protocols as federal overreach. They argued that local institutions should be allowed to handle their own problems. And how did you address those concerns? Marcus looked toward Isabella in the audience. She was now 14, confident and articulate, preparing to testify about how institutional protection had allowed her to thrive academically and personally. We addressed them by demonstrating results. In Riverside, student academic performance has improved across all demographic groups since the reforms were implemented. Teacher retention has increased by 30%. Patient safety scores at the hospital have reached all-time highs. When institutions stop spending energy on cover-ups and retaliation, they can focus on their actual missions. Representative Sarah Chen, no relation to his former partner, raised her hand. Agent Thompson, your pilot program has focused primarily on schools and hospitals. Do you see applications for other types of institutions? Absolutely. We're currently expanding to include youth sports organizations, religious institutions, and social service agencies. Anywhere there's a power imbalance between institutions and the people they serve, there's potential for the kind of corruption we've been documenting. Marcus advanced to his final slide, showing a map of the United States with colored dots, indicating communities that had requested implementation of the institutional accountability protocols. Congresswoman Walsh, 47 states have now requested federal assistance in implementing these programs. We're not just talking about isolated cases of corruption, we're talking about systemic problems that require coordinated federal response. After his testimony concluded, Marcus joined Dr. Santos and the girls in the hallway outside the hearing room. Isabella looked nervous but determined as she reviewed her prepared statement one final time. "How are you feeling about testifying?" Marcus asked her. "Nervous," Isabella admitted, "but also excited. When I think about all the kids who are going through what I went through and how this program could help them, it makes it worth it." Emma, who had testified before Congress twice already as part of her youth advisory role, offered encouragement. "Just remember to speak slowly and make eye contact with the representatives. They want to understand your experience, not test you." Dr. Santos looked prouder than Marcus had ever seen her. "I still can't believe my daughter is about to address Congress. 3 years ago, she was hiding in the Jefferson Middle School library trying to avoid bullies." "Dr. Santos, you should be proud of both of you," Marcus said. "Your courage in reporting Dr. Brennan started all of this. Isabella's resilience in the face of harassment inspired the victim protection protocols we're now implementing nationwide." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Agent Sarah Chen, who had driven down from Riverside to observe the hearings. She was now Marcus's deputy director in the Institutional Accountability Division and had become the lead investigator for several high-profile cases. "Marcus, I just got off the phone with the Attorney General's office," Sarah said, barely containing her excitement. "They want to expand the program to 50 additional communities next year. They're also approving funding for a national training center." Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. When he'd first intervened in Isabella's bullying situation, he'd never imagined it would lead to a national program protecting vulnerable people from institutional abuse. "Where do they want to locate the training center?" "Riverside," Sarah replied with a grin. "They want to build it on the Jefferson Middle School campus as a permanent reminder of how grassroots advocacy can create systemic change." Isabella looked up from her notes. "They're going to build a training center at my old school?" "Not just any training center," Sarah explained. "It'll be the National Center for Institutional Accountability and Child Protection. Law enforcement officers, educators, healthcare workers, and advocates from around the world will come to Riverside to learn about preventing and prosecuting institutional corruption." Emma's eyes lit up. "That mean Riverside is going to become like the headquarters for this kind of work?" "Exactly. And the best part is, they want current and former students from Jefferson to serve as peer educators, sharing their experiences with professionals who are implementing these programs in their own communities." Marcus watched the interplay between the three most important people in his professional transformation. Emma had grown into a sophisticated advocate who could hold her own with seasoned policymakers. Isabella had evolved from a terrified victim into a powerful voice for institutional reform. And Dr. Santos had become a national expert on healthcare whistleblower protection, consulted by hospitals and medical boards across the country. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "The White House wants to host a ceremony next month recognizing the Riverside community for their role in developing the institutional accountability model. All of you are specifically invited." The magnitude of the recognition was almost overwhelming. What had started as a single father protecting a bullied child had become a national movement that was reshaping how institutions across America handled accountability and transparency. As they prepared to enter the hearing room for Isabella's testimony, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The federal cases stemming from the original Riverside investigation had resulted in dozens of convictions and millions of dollars in restitution to victims. But the real victory was in the institutional changes that were protecting thousands of children and families who would never know how different their lives might have been without these protections. Isabella's testimony was powerful and moving. She spoke eloquently about the fear and isolation she'd experienced, but also about how proper institutional support had allowed her to transform those experiences into advocacy for others. She described her work with the Voices of Change program, which had now expanded to over 200 schools nationwide. "When I was being harassed at Jefferson Middle School," Isabella told the congressional panel, "I felt completely alone. I thought the problem was me, that I was too different, too ambitious, too visible. What Agent Thompson and Dr. Williams helped me understand is that the problem wasn't me. The problem was a system that allowed bullies to operate with impunity because their parents had money and influence." Representative Walsh asked, "Isabella, what would you want other young people in similar situations to know?" Isabella paused thoughtfully before answering. "I would want them to know that their voices matter, that adults have a responsibility to protect them, and that institutions can change when people demand accountability. But most importantly, I would want them to know that being different or talented isn't something to apologize for. The world needs people who are willing to stand out and speak up." The hearing room erupted in applause. Marcus noticed that several of the representatives were visibly moved by Isabella's testimony, and he knew that her words would carry significant weight in the committee's final recommendations. After the hearing concluded, the group gathered for dinner at a restaurant near Capitol Hill. The conversation ranged from policy implementation challenges to Isabella's upcoming performance with the National Youth Symphony Orchestra to Emma's plans for college and continued advocacy work. "Dr. Santos," Marcus said as they were finishing their meal, "I've been meaning to ask you about something. The Justice Department has been approached by several international organizations about implementing institutional accountability programs in other countries. Would you be interested in serving as a consultant for global healthcare reforms?" Maria's eyes widened. "International work? I never imagined my experience would be relevant on that scale." "Your experience is exactly what's needed," Marcus replied. "Healthcare systems around the world struggle with the same issues we identified in Riverside. Professionals afraid to report safety concerns because of retaliation. Institutional leaders more focused on protecting reputations than patients. And vulnerable populations bearing the cost of systemic dysfunction." Emma leaned forward excitedly. "Mom Santos." She had started calling Dr. Santos shortly after the federal investigation concluded. "You could literally help save lives all over the world." Isabella nodded enthusiastically. "And I could help with the educational components. The Voices of Change model could be adapted for different cultures and educational systems." Marcus watched the three of them planning global advocacy initiatives and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not the professional satisfaction of a successful investigation, but the deeper fulfillment of knowing that their work would continue to protect vulnerable people long after his own career ended. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, checking her phone for messages. "I just heard from the Riverside Police Department. They wanted us to know that juvenile crime rates in the school district have dropped by 40% since the institutional accountability protocols were implemented." "That's incredible," Dr. Santos said. "But why would school reforms affect juvenile crime?" Marcus had been tracking this correlation in several pilot communities. When institutions function properly, young people learn that actions have consequences, and that authority figures can be trusted to address problems fairly. When institutions are corrupt, young people learn that power trumps justice and that the system can't be trusted. He pulled out his tablet and showed them a chart tracking various social indicators across the pilot communities. "We're seeing improvements in academic performance, mental health outcomes, community trust in institutions, and even economic development. When corruption is eliminated, everything works better." As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Marcus received a call from the Attorney General's office. After a brief conversation, he turned back to the group with news that would reshape their plans for the coming year. That was Deputy Attorney General Morrison. "Congress is going to approve emergency funding for immediate expansion of the institutional accountability program to all 50 states. They want us to begin implementation within 6 months." The magnitude of the task ahead was daunting, but Marcus felt energized rather than overwhelmed. He had the right team, proven protocols, and most importantly, the support of communities across the country who were ready to demand better from their institutions. "Are you ready for this?" he asked the group. Emma grinned. "Dad, we've been ready since the day you decided to help Isabella in the Jefferson parking lot." Isabella nodded firmly. "Let's protect every kid who needs it." Dr. Santos raised her water glass in a toast. "To institutional accountability and the children we're going to keep safe." As Marcus looked around the table at his unlikely family of advocates, he realized that the most important thing he'd learned from the Riverside investigation wasn't about corruption or law enforcement. It was about the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept that this is just how things are. The fight for institutional accountability was far from over, but Marcus Thompson knew they were winning. And more importantly, he knew they wouldn't stop until every child in America could pursue their dreams without fear of institutional retaliation or abuse. 5 years after that morning, in Jefferson Middle School's parking lot, Marcus Thompson stood at the podium of the newly constructed National Center for Institutional Accountability, preparing to deliver the keynote address at the first International Conference on Child Protection and Institutional Reform. The modern glass building, erected on the grounds where the old Jefferson Middle School had once stood, now hosted delegates from 43 countries who had come to learn from the Riverside model. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very spot where Isabella Santos had once been cornered by bullies was now the epicenter of a global movement protecting vulnerable children from institutional abuse. The transformation seemed almost impossible, yet here he was, looking out at an audience of ministers of education, healthcare administrators, law enforcement officials, and child advocates from around the world. 5 years ago, Marcus began, I was just a single father dropping his daughter off at school. I had no intention of starting a global movement, reforming institutional governance, or addressing Congress. I simply saw a child being harassed and decided that wasn't acceptable. In the front row, Dr. Maria Santos sat with her husband. She had remarried 2 years earlier to Dr. James Patterson, the new chief of surgery at Riverside General. Isabella, now 19 and a sophomore at Juilliard, had flown in from New York for the conference. Emma, 21 and finishing her master's degree in public policy at Georgetown, served as the conference's youth coordinator. The lesson I want to share with you today, Marcus continued, is that transformative change often begins with the smallest acts of courage. Dr. Santos didn't set out to revolutionize healthcare whistleblower protection when she reported an impaired colleague. Isabella didn't plan to become an international advocate when she started documenting her experiences with bullying. Emma didn't imagine she'd be advising government officials when she defended her friend in a school cafeteria. He clicked to his first slide, showing statistics that still amazed him. In the 5 years since implementing the Riverside Protocols, we've documented a 78% reduction in successful institutional retaliation across participating communities. More than 50,000 children have been protected from harassment and abuse that would have gone unchecked under the old systems. The numbers represented real lives. Children who could pursue their talents without fear, families who could report wrongdoing without facing destruction, communities where institutions served their intended purposes rather than protecting corrupt leadership. But the most important change isn't captured in our statistics, Marcus said, advancing to a slide showing photographs from schools, hospitals, and community organizations around the world. The most important change is cultural. We've created a generation of young people who understand that institutional authority comes with institutional accountability. He paused as scattered applause filled the auditorium. These young people don't accept that's just how things are as an adequate response to institutional dysfunction. They understand that their voices matter, that adults have obligations to protect them, and that systems can change when people demand better. After his keynote, Marcus joined a panel discussion featuring Dr. Santos, Isabella, and Emma, along with advocates from Brazil, South Africa, and Sweden, who had implemented variations of the Riverside model in their own contexts. Dr. Santos asked Dr. Ingrid Larsson from Stockholm, what advice would you give to healthcare professionals in countries where reporting misconduct can result in career destruction or even physical threats? Maria leaned into her microphone. The first thing I would tell them is that isolation is the enemy of accountability. Dr. Brennan was able to operate with impunity for years because his victims were picked off one by one. When we connected with other families, when Agent Thompson provided federal protection, when the community rallied around institutional reform, that's when we became powerful enough to create change. Isabella added, "From a student perspective, I think the key is documentation and alliance building. When I was being harassed, I felt helpless because I thought I was the only one experiencing it. Once we started documenting patterns and connecting with other targets, we realized we were dealing with systemic problems that required systematic solutions." Dr. Rajesh Gupta from Mumbai raised his hand. "Ms. Thompson, how do you balance protecting individual victims with the need for institutional transparency? In some cultures, public exposure of wrongdoing can bring shame to entire families or communities." Emma fielded this question with the diplomatic skills she'd developed through years of international advocacy work. That's exactly why we emphasize that institutional accountability isn't about punishment, it's about prevention. When institutions have transparent reporting systems and effective oversight, problems get addressed before they escalate to the point where public exposure becomes necessary. The panel continued for over an hour, with delegates asking detailed questions about implementation challenges, funding mechanisms, and cultural adaptation strategies. Marcus was struck by how sophisticated the international conversation had become. What had started as a local crisis response had evolved into nuanced policy frameworks being adopted by governments worldwide. During the lunch break, Marcus found himself in conversation with Minister Elena Vasquez from Colombia, who was implementing institutional accountability measures in schools affected by decades of conflict. "Agent Thompson, your model assumes that law enforcement and judicial systems can be trusted to investigate institutional corruption fairly. In post-conflict societies, those assumptions don't always hold. How do we adapt your protocols when the institutions meant to provide accountability are themselves compromised?" It was a profound question that got to the heart of why institutional reform was so challenging in many parts of the world. Marcus had been grappling with similar issues as the program expanded internationally. "Minister Vasquez, you're absolutely right that our model depends on certain baseline assumptions about rule of law. But I think there are ways to create accountability even in challenging environments." He pulled out his tablet and showed her case studies from several countries where external oversight had been necessary. In Rwanda, they've created international monitoring partnerships where foreign experts work alongside local advocates to investigate institutional misconduct. In Guatemala, they're using technology platforms that allow anonymous reporting to international human rights organizations. "The key," Emma added, joining their conversation, "is recognizing that accountability doesn't always have to come from traditional government institutions. Civil society organizations, international partnerships, and even corporate responsibility initiatives can create pressure for institutional reform." As the afternoon sessions began, Marcus attended a workshop led by Isabella on peer education strategies. It was remarkable to watch the young woman who had once hidden in school libraries now confidently training adult professionals on how to empower student voices in institutional oversight. "The most effective accountability systems," Isabella explained to a room full of education ministers and school administrators, "are the ones that treat students as partners rather than passive recipients of protection. When young people understand how institutions are supposed to work, they become your most effective monitors of whether they're actually working that way." She showed video testimonials from students around the world who had successfully advocated for institutional reforms in their schools and communities. These aren't exceptional kids with special training. These are ordinary students who were given the tools and support they needed to hold institutions accountable. One of the testimonials featured a student from rural Kenya who had documented teacher absenteeism and used that evidence to advocate for better oversight systems. Another showed teenagers in Brazil who had created a peer mediation program that reduced school violence by 60%. The pattern is always the same, Isabella continued. When institutions take student voices seriously and create safe channels for reporting problems, students respond by becoming invested in making those institutions work better. During the final session of the conference, Marcus found himself reflecting on the personal journey that had brought him to this moment. 5 years ago, he had been a widowed father focused primarily on protecting his own daughter and building a stable life in a new community. Today, he was running a federal program that operated in all 50 states and was being replicated on 6 continents. The personal costs had been significant. The work demanded constant travel, intense media scrutiny, and the emotional weight of dealing with institutional corruption cases that often involved serious harm to children. There had been times when Marcus questioned whether the sacrifice was worth it, whether he was missing too much of Emma's life, whether the stress was taking too heavy a toll on their family. But looking around the conference center, seeing delegates from around the world, comparing notes on protecting vulnerable children, watching young advocates like Isabella confidently training seasoned professionals, observing Emma coordinate international partnerships with the skill of a seasoned diplomat, Marcus knew that every sacrifice had been worthwhile. As the conference concluded, the 4 core members of what had become known as the Riverside team gathered for a private dinner at Marcus's favorite restaurant in town. It had become a tradition after major events, a chance to decompress and remember why they had started this work. "So what's next?" Dr. Santos asked as they settled into their seats. Emma pulled out her phone and began scrolling through messages. "Well, the European Union wants to implement mandatory institutional accountability protocols in all member schools and hospitals. The African Union is requesting technical assistance for a continent-wide initiative. And the United Nations is considering creating a permanent body focused on institutional corruption affecting children." Isabella laughed. "Remember when our biggest goal was getting Tyler Marsh to stop being a jerk? Tyler's actually doing well, by the way," Marcus said. "I got an update from his probation officer last month. He's completing his bachelor's degree in social work and wants to specialize in anti-bullying programs." The transformation of the original antagonists had been one of the unexpected outcomes of the Riverside approach. Rather than simply punishing wrongdoers, the institutional accountability model emphasized rehabilitation and education. Tyler Marsh, Chloe Brennan, and even some of the adults involved in the original conspiracy had become advocates for the very reforms they had once resisted. "That's the thing I'm most proud of," Dr. Santos said. "We didn't just stop the people who were hurting kids. We helped them understand why their behavior was harmful and gave them tools to do better." As dinner wound down, Marcus raised his glass for a toast. 5 years ago, Isabella Santos was a scared 13-year-old being harassed in a school parking lot. Today, she's training government officials from around the world on how to protect vulnerable children. That transformation, that's what this work is really about. He looked around the table at the 3 women who had become his chosen family. "We've built something that's going to protect millions of children, but more importantly, we've proven that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept that suffering is inevitable." Isabella raised her glass to meet his. "To institutional accountability," Emma added her glass, "to protecting every child who needs it." Dr. Santos completed the toast. "To never accepting that's just how things are." As they left the restaurant and walked through downtown Riverside, Marcus marveled at how much the community had changed. The National Center for Institutional Accountability had brought hundreds of high-paying jobs to the area. The success of the Jefferson Middle School reforms had attracted families from around the country who wanted their children educated in a system that prioritized safety and accountability. Property values had risen, new businesses had opened, and the community had developed a national reputation as a model for institutional governance. But the most important change was less visible. Children in Riverside grew up understanding that their voices mattered, that institutions existed to serve them rather than the other way around, and that they had both the right and the responsibility to demand accountability from those in positions of authority. As Marcus dropped off Dr. Santos and said goodbye to the girls, he reflected on the unpredictable path that had led from a moment of intervention in a school parking lot to a global movement affecting millions of lives. He thought about Sarah, his late wife, and how proud she would have been of the work they had accomplished. He thought about the thousands of children who were safer because of the systems they had built, and the thousands more who would be protected as those systems continued to expand. Most of all, he thought about the simple truth that had guided him from the beginning. When you see someone being hurt, especially someone who can't protect themselves, you have a choice. You can look away and hope someone else takes action, or you can step forward and do what's right. Marcus Thompson had learned that sometimes stepping forward to do what's right can change the world. Up next, you've got two more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.